Eric Averill, and I'm joined by my partner, Brandon Averill. Today,
Disclaimer: Eric Averill and Brandon Averill are the co-founders of AWM Capital. Due to industry regulations, it's essential to explicitly state that investment or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you, and you should discuss your specific situation with a qualified, certified financial planner. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of AWM Capital or its affiliates. For more information, visit athleteceo.com.
hey there, Athlete CEO listeners. I'm your host, Eric Averill from Athlete Wealth, and you're listening to the Athlete CEO podcast. Each week, we aim to bring you world-class interviews with some of the brightest and successful entrepreneurs, athletes, and business minds today, sharing actionable insight on how to get more out of your business, finances, and life. You won't be hearing any vague theory or strategies from us. Our guests have walked the walk and are committed to sharing the best of what they know so you can apply the lessons they've learned. Whether you're an athlete, entrepreneur, or just looking to hear from some crazy successful guests, this podcast is for you. Now, enough with the intro. Let's dive into today's show.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Athlete CEO Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Averill. Very excited for today's show. We have an opportunity to hear from Eric Cressey, the founder and CEO of Cressey Sports Performance. Eric is considered the leading expert in the strength and conditioning industry for professional athletes, specifically baseball players. Eric has two facilities, the original in Hudson, Mass., and the second down in Jupiter, Florida. And every offseason, the top baseball players, specifically a lot of pitchers, travel down to Jupiter, Florida, relocate their families so that they have the opportunity to train with Eric during the offseason. In 2017, Eric trained both Cy Young Award winners and Max Scherzer and Corey Kluber, which is just a testament to the type of work that Eric's doing specifically with baseball players. Why I'm very excited for you guys to be able to hear from Eric is, in an industry that's littered with hundreds of thousands of personal trainers, Eric was able to carve a niche for himself and really become the expert in a highly competitive industry, and there's a lot to learn from that. Eric also is going to break down for you guys the difference of just being a technician and actually moving to what it takes to become a business owner. Beyond being a business owner and obviously an expert in the strength and conditioning field, Eric's an accomplished author. He's submitted over 50 articles to peer journals. He's authored 5 books, and he's a sought-after speaker. He's spoken in 6 different countries and speaks regularly all over the United States. Beyond the professional credentials that Eric hosts, he's a father of 2. He has twin little girls, and his wife is a highly accomplished optometrist. And so we dive into what it's like to have a home where you have 2 entrepreneurs and what does success look like. We dispel the myth of work-life balance, really start to talk about priority management. So that's an issue that so many professional athletes and you guys as entrepreneurs deal with. So just to hear Eric's thoughts of how they navigate that. And, lastly, we dive into what type of advice does Eric have for investing, himself being an angel investor and an advisor to a lot of different startup companies. Eric has great advice of the best investments he's made and the mistakes that he's made and what he can learn from that. So very excited, a unique privilege to spend an hour with Eric Cressey. So without further ado, let's jump into my conversation with Eric.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining us today on the Athlete CEO podcast. I'm super excited to have you on for a few different reasons. First, obviously, you're crushing it from a business standpoint, but over the last decade, being in the sports world, it's pretty rare that you come across someone who's not only being successful on the business side, but genuinely has a ton of integrity and authenticity, and so it's an exciting thing for me to not only interview you from a success standpoint, but really someone that I respect as a person and look up to as a dad and a husband. So thanks for being on the show.
I appreciate you saying that. Thanks for having me. This is exciting to do.
Cool. Well, where I thought would be a great place to start is jumping in background. But a little different than a lot of podcasts. I think we can jump on Google and read a lot about you on an about page. And and Wikipedia and all those good things. But what I really want to get into is what we can't read about you. And so I spent some time listening to podcasts that you've done. And one of the most interesting things of where I'd love to start is you talking about starting Cressy Performance back 2006-07 of this dinner at Applebee's where you and Pete drew up a business plan on a napkin. So let's start there. Tell us, was the vision to create what you've done and it's just gone perfectly, or, walk us through that?
Yeah, it's funny. So I left UConn after doing my grad degree in 2005. And, when I went to the University of Connecticut, I knew I wanted to do strength and conditioning. I didn't really know that I wanted to do it in this context. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go into research. And actually our lab at the University of Connecticut was much more like exercise endocrinology. We didn't even have a true biomechanics lab. And it just so happened that while I was there, I caught the strength and conditioning bug. I got to observe some varsity coaches in the weight room, and it struck me that way. And, but what was interesting was when I was at the University of Connecticut, I was actually much more involved in basketball and soccer. We had 4 number 1 teams in the country in our weight room. So I had very little exposure to baseball while I was in that college environment. It just so happened when I went to the private sector after graduating grad school that some of the first guys that I dealt with were baseball players. I really had 4 that first off season. I think it was 2006 to 2007. And it just so happened that, basically all 4 of them wound up going Division I. One of them won State Player of the Year. I think he gave up 1 earned run on the year, went like 12-0 on the mound. They won a state championship. My phone started ringing off the hook. And that kind of gave rise to, instead of working as an independent contractor, actually opening our own place. But what was really, really interesting is we never set out to be the baseball guys. It was something that, very much happened by accident. I'm a firm believer you kind of have to be that generalist before you're a specialist. And it took us some time for us to feel out our expertise and, certainly relate it back to some of my own history with shoulder issues and all that. But yeah, I mean, our first facility, like you said, it was business plan on a napkin at Applebee's. If you walked into it, it was like this 3,300 square foot candy cane shape. You walked into the bathroom and you thought you needed a tetanus shot. It was just it was not an aesthetic. I mean, I can remember some moms walking in when they brought their kids in being like, where am I? What am I doing? But sure enough, we were only there like 8 or 9 months. We actually grew out of it really quickly and expanded to a larger and more aesthetically appealing location. But, a lot of people think that like I was some like elite baseball player growing up, or, that I had, some kind of exposure to this at a really, really high level to put me in this position. And really, I was a complete outsider. I played baseball until 8th grade. So when the time came to start working with players, it forced me to shut my mouth, kind of do a lot more listening, ask a lot more questions, bury my nose in books and research articles, get around physical therapists as much as I could to really learn this. And I think that's actually served us well, because I haven't, been drawn to kind of the traditional way of doing it. We've been open-minded to trying new strategies, and I think the players do appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, let's stick on that point a little bit about, your commitment to the expertise. I think, I visited Hudson, Mass back in, I want to say 2009. So, it wasn't an easy place to get to for athletes. So obviously you were doing something unique and that was working. And we were talking a little bit early before we started taping of your guys' industry is a little similar to ours on the financial side, that there's a personal trainer on every corner, and there's always my guy. And being a former professional athlete myself and having a strength coach since I was 16 years old back in the early 2000s, there hadn't been anybody in the baseball industry who had kind of taken it by storm as far as saying like, no, we are the authority. And I know that probably wasn't the goal to set out, but, how have you become really the go-to guy in the baseball community? Talk about what it's taken to develop the expertise.
Yeah. I think there's a great quote, Randy Hetrick, who founded TRX. I remember an article they were talking, and Randy's a former Navy SEAL who came up with the idea for TRX while on a submarine. He needed a way to get an upper body workout. He threw a strap over a pole on a submarine and did a bunch of inverted rows, and TRX was born. And he said, if you want to build a business, solve a problem. And that was something that, I wouldn't have known if I had set out, right out of undergrad, hey, I need to go and train baseball players. I was training high-level triathletes. I had a little bit of everything when I first got going. And what really happened was, we started working with some of these baseball guys, and we realized, wow, this is a tremendously underserved population. And it's because there's, as is often the case, the pendulum goes too far in one of the directions. One, you have people that just get this kind of foo-foo rotator cuff program. They're treating all these baseball players like delicate little flowers in the weight room, and nobody's really pushing them. The assumption is just, run 5 miles after a start, throw a bag of ice on your shoulder, and you'll be good to go. And at the other end of the spectrum, you had a lot of kids that were just kind of being thrown into the football fire, right? So it was, clean squat bench and, hope for the best. And, those are guys that are getting hurt in the weight room and stuff. So, what we did was we said, hey, let's take some logic here. Let's build on our experiences in physical therapy. Let's talk about my experiences as a power lifter in terms of the camaraderie in a gym and how we can push guys and get guys stronger. But also let's keep in mind, what their unique demands are and what they need to accomplish. And so really what you find is you find this like melding in the middle, where you can push guys incredibly hard, without necessarily injuring them, obviously, if you understand what their unique needs are, what the demands of the sport are. And that's where we fell. And it's gotten, I think, more and more interesting over the years, is just how you think that you get specialized, and then you realize there's subspecializations across the board where, I was a really, really good shoulder guy when I started out. Like I understood that very, very well. And then you get exposed to different disciplines of how to manage the shoulder. Like you look at what we were doing in like 2008, we were sleeper stretching a lot of guys. And then we got exposed to the Posture Restoration Institute in 2010, and it changed our approach on that. And it's made us markedly better. And then shoulder becomes elbow, and, you learn a little bit more of that. And then all of a sudden, there's this, kind of rash of thoracic outlet injuries, where you have to learn about a new kind of etiology of injury. And then also, how to handle guys after the surgeries. You get to learn, surgical tendencies on, West Coast versus East Coast Tommy Johns. So I'm like probably the only like strength conditioning coach in the world that I regularly look at radiology reports. Like I want to know what the radiologist dictated, to a kid who's got an elbow issue. I want to know what his post-op notes are. So I definitely, whether it was intentional or not, I seem to just be going further and further down the rabbit hole. And it's not to work outside my scope of practice, just because a lot of that information that I can acquire makes our training programs better when it comes to actually preventing those injuries. So, but it all started because of generalist. I had to know anatomy. I had to have exposure to a lot of different sports to appreciate that my skill set was suited for specializing in this regard a little bit more.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I think one of the things that I've watched from afar of you working with a lot of our clients is where it's been so different is that they'll train at a lot of high performance, places with big names, but it's not very individualized. When you really cut it down, is they're still trying to fit them into a specific mold. And I think just watching what you've done with Noah Syndergaard over the last 2 years, right? Talk a little bit about how important individualization programming is for clients.
It's huge. I think particularly in a sport like baseball, where you have to think about it this way, right? Throwing a baseball is an incredibly specific, action, right? We've all seen like the animation they did of Yu Darvish throwing like 6 different pitches out of the exact same tunnel. Like you want low variability in your release point as a pitcher. You want to do the exact same thing over and over again with different grips. So it's probably the lowest variability action on the the course on the face of the planet. But taking it a step further, the shoulder internally rotates at 7,000 degrees per second. It's also the single fastest motion ever recorded in sports. And it comes from these extreme joint angles that we can't even get to during our daily lives. So we have this kind of like, 3-pronged, kind of component of stress that's thrown on our body, and bodies are craving movement variability. What you realize is that these athletes, they all have their own unique ways of compensating. They have certain things that get them into trouble. So for a guy like Noah, not getting clean layback because his lats were so stiff, that was an issue for him that had to be addressed. You have other guys that may have that kind of exact same problem, but they wind up with low back pain, right? Or they have a lat strain in the muscle belly instead of on the tendinous attachment. So everyone presents uniquely in terms of injury histories, movement faults, things like that. So you really have to really dig deep, but you also have to take those movement things. And you have to relate them to, hey, how are you performing on the field, right? Do you have a hard time throwing a glove side fastball? Are you always sore in your lats after you throw? Is it that you're missing up an arm side? Or you cutting balls off? What are the kind of the things that you're realizing as your outcome measures? And sometimes have to work really, really far backwards from them. So I think where we've had some success though is not just, the individualization is important, but it's the synergy between what we do manual therapy wise, what we do training wise, what we do on the throwing side of things, and putting all those pieces together, I think is really where the true power is. And I think what's really, really important, at least from an organizational standpoint, maybe this speaks to the entrepreneurs a little bit more, is that you have to all be able to speak the same language. And I think where we see players often struggle in pro ball or college or wherever it may be is it's often because the different components, whether it's strength and conditioning, sports medicine, the scouts, the front office, whatever it is, they don't speak the same language. So they can't necessarily, powwow on these discussions. So we try to have these very, very involved conversations to figure out what the right mix is for each player.
Yeah, no, I think just that point I was thinking at the very end was the importance of the synergy, and talk a little bit about that as being a business owner of, a few things stood out to me is you've become this expert in so many different areas, but the humility to say, I don't know, to refer out. And I think even in a very gentle way in an industry that can become very frustrating when you're part of an organization that you don't think gets it, or there's turnover in staff and things like that, is, I've never actually heard you say anything negative about any of these people, which is tremendous, because if you're a player, with a medical staff or something, it's your career. And so it becomes very frustrating. Is how have you navigated that, working with people that are difficult to communicate with? And how do you take something that's so complex where you're looking at radiology reports and you're looking at these to put it into something that's actionable during the season for a player?
Yeah, I think, I try to get along with absolutely everybody. That's, that's the way my wife would call me an eternal optimist, is maybe one of my fatal flaws. But that's just who I am. I mean, it's the way I was raised. And I think, you're always going to get a lot more done if you figure out how to meet people in the middle. You figure out what you agree on, you cultivate relationships, and then you build rapport from there. It allows you to work through your differences a little bit more uniquely. I think that's always the way to go about doing it. I think, certainly there are challenging dynamics that come about. And I think, what you have to come back to is that, I work for the players. Like at the end of the day, those are who our clients are, and we always have to do what's in our best interest. So we, for their career's sake, we want to, be tactful in both the way we educate them so that they can be advocates for themselves, but also in the way we do outreach to teams, agents, whoever it is that they need us to do outreach for. But I think it always comes back to, you have to ask yourself, am I doing what's right, in the interest of, our athlete in front of us? And I feel like if you do that, you can always sleep really, really well at night, knowing that you did that. And it's just, that's an approach that's guided the way we've attacked things.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, I think is just in any business, as you start to have more success, opportunities come up, right? I mean, you're the guy in the baseball world, but it's no shortage. I mean, for the entrepreneur, I've heard your name multiple times on Tim Ferriss's podcast, which is like, means you've made it, right? I'm sure you have the NFL guys that want you to train them. It's the high-level CEO that wants you to train them. It's now all of these opportunities are flooding into you, wanting to, I imagine, we'll talk about it later, I'm sure people have approached you of franchising your business and things like that. How have you handled that, and why have you made kind of the decision to stay in a niche?
Yeah, I think you certainly evaluate, everything that you really enjoy doing. Like I enjoy the evaluation / programming / coaching process. Like to me, it's like a choose your own adventure book where, everything is unique. So there's never a mundane day where it feels just like it was yesterday. Like that process really excites me. I love the idea of being kind of the conductor. That's what I do well, is put those pieces together. What's actually really interesting, there's a great book called The Captain's Class. And they looked at some of the successful sports teams of all time. They looked at, the Bulls with Jordan and the Celtics with Bill Russell and, Brazil national team with Pele. And what they actually talked about is if you look at some of these teams, very early over the course of history where the best teams, teams where the player was also the captain. And that's something I've realized over the course of time is that, I maybe might be the most insightful with respect to assessing and programming. Maybe I'm one of the best coaches on the floor, but I can't do that and be the best leader. So one of the things that I've actually really gone out of my way is to find people and put them in leadership roles at our facility. And I'm the first to admit, I just don't have the time to do that, especially as a dad and all that. So, in some of the mentorship roles that our facility actually really requires, John O'Neill is our director of performance in Massachusetts. Tim Geramini is our director of performance in Florida. And those guys do a lot more like mentorship with our internships. They do a lot more of like, looking through applications when people are reaching out for those internships, or we're, hiring coaches. So we have people in positions to help me basically focus on what I'm really good at. So that's what I've ultimately, kind of been working towards in recent years. But I think what you have to really, recognize is that you always have to be better at saying no than you are at saying yes. And that's a really, really hard thing to do. You get approached with millions of different opportunities. We get asked about franchising in a new location at least twice a week. You'd be amazed how many people are like, yeah, you guys would kill it in Minnesota, or Pittsburgh or whatever it is. And, what they often, a lot of times, obviously it's like a dad who just wants something convenient down the road. But, there's certainly other opportunities that come up, whether it's, opportunities with teams or, other sports. Like I've turned down opportunities to do like NBA combine prep from agents that we work with. And, NBA combine prep literally happens right around the time that spring training starts, right when we actually get like 4 weeks to gather our thoughts before a crazy college season. So, it's just one of those things where I'm not good at it. I'm getting better at it because it's something that's been driven, honestly, more than anything else by family. It is. I know how much, you travel, and certainly a lot of the agents that we both know, like, being on the road 3 to 4 days a week, the last thing you want to do is like come home and have a bunch of competing demands for stuff that, you aren't at all passionate about when you just want to play with your kids. So having kids has actually helped me a lot with starting to push those away. The one that's, the toughest is there are a lot of exercise science professors that give their students projects, go interview a professional. So I've got, over 100,000 people on my newsletter list, and a lot of them are like college kids. So the second they get that assignment, they email. So I get literally like 2 requests a day from people who want to interview me for their exercise science project. And I feel like an absolute jerk every time I turn it down, because I know what that conversation would have meant to me as an undergrad if I could have gotten, a guy who was 15 years ahead of me. If I could gotten on the phone with like Charlie Francis or an Al Vermeil or something like that, but there physically isn't time. So you try to pick projects that allow you to have the most reach, that allow you to be the most impactful, and, maybe have the biggest return on investment for you.
Yeah, no, that's great. Share a little bit. It's interesting of the, you would kill it here, open a gym here. I mean, with athletes, right? We're investment managers, so our athletes have lots of ideas, right? But your typical is they want to open a restaurant, they want to start a clothing company, or the ultimate one, I want to open a training facility, and the training facility conversation is interesting because I think they just assume I'm a big name, I'll be able to just get a bunch of people in. And talk to me a little bit about how difficult it is to run a training facility.
I mean, there's certainly no days where it's no different than running a gym or running a restaurant or a law practice or something along those lines. So you certainly, there are commonalities. And at the end of the day, it's managing people. There are going to be days when the roof leaks, or, we had a day 2 weeks ago at our Florida facility where one of our neighbors was washing decals off his boat with like acetone solution. The smell of like nail polish was so strong that we literally had to like delay opening the facility for like 2 hours because people were gonna get sick. I'm like, this is stuff that you don't get taught during your exercise science degree or anything like that, but you're to some degree at the mercy of other folks. So there are definitely challenges to it. So I think when you look at those opportunities to grow, like certainly we opened in Massachusetts, and then when we were 7 years in, we opened the facility in Florida, and it was a logical, progression. It was close to spring training complexes. We had a lot of players that were kind of on the ground there that, were extensions of our brand. So it was a way for us to increase our outreach, maybe even a little bit more geographic commute for some people. Warm weather was a little bit more appealing for players that wanted to be, working with us over an extended period of time instead of just doing that 3 to 5 day check-in. But the question is, what happens with, going 1 to 2 was hard. What happens if you want to go from 2 to 3 or 2 to 5 or 2 to 10? And, here's what you have to look at is, like, if you look at the fitness industry, right? Traditionally, I think franchises, you collect like 6% on gross. So, on a gross return, like, let's say a gym goes out and crushes it and does $1 million a year. Like, that'd be a really good year for most gyms. That would certainly put them in the top 5% of the industry. Like, for $60,000, like, do I want to get on the phone for 45 minutes twice a week? Do I want to expose the Cressy name to that level of potential frustrations and this, that, and the other? So if that's kind of the the model that you want to pursue, like, it's economies of scale. Like, you can't go 2 to 3 and be wildly fulfilled without having a ton of headaches. If you're going to develop those systems, you really need to go 2 to 30.
Right.
Or something like that. And you need to have those big conference calls. And it was interesting. I just actually went down, and New Balance flew me down to Birmingham, Alabama a couple of days ago. And I spoke at kind of like a big managers meeting for Hibbett Sports. And Hibbett Sports is interesting. I don't know if you even know about them, but they're small town sporting goods stores all throughout the South. And they have 1,100 stores. And I think they did $950 million in revenue. And they found this remarkable kind of like niche in the market where, hey, some people want to go online and buy from Amazon, but there's a whole host of people in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana who might have to drive an hour and a half to the nearest Dick's Sporting Goods. Yeah. They may want to try on those cleats before they buy it, or maybe they want a name brand glove, or there's just something about it where they don't feel comfortable ordering it online. And they've really carved out like a cool niche. Like, they have a bunch of stores that probably do basically 700 to 1.2 million in revenue. And it really, really works. But in order to make that work, you have to have those 1,100 stores. They wouldn't be thriving the way they are in a tough economy if they only had 20 of them. Right. So I think that's the thing people don't realize is you have to spread yourself really thin to go from 2 to 3. So if you're going to do 2 to 3, you better be ready to have a bunch more. And that's not a goal for me. I'd rather have my reach be through the players we work with, doing more outreach with seminars, coaching trainers, on how to expand that reach in that way, and having a strong internship program. So we spread our wings by having guys that are working in professional sports and college sports.
Awesome. To kind of staying on the investing conversation around, athletes is, I think it's like all of us, when you start to have a little success, doors open and opportunities open. And we're seeing this big trend of athletes wanting to get, involved in venture capital or angel investing. Yeah. Tell me about your experience. I've read you've made some angel investments and have been an advisor on some startups. What's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, I'll tell you. So my first foray into it was actually 2007. So I had, put out a couple products and, started to have some cash flow. We had invested in the business, pretty much put every cent I own, and then started to earn some money back off that. And I had a friend that reached out to me about a piece of fitness equipment. He's actually a professional sports strength coach. I won't mention who it is. And he was like, "Hey, this thing is awesome." He's like, I'm gonna have him send you some to try out. They're, a startup, they're, bootstrapping it right now, and they just need some financial resources to get inventory up. So check it out. Let me know what you think. They sent it to me and I loved it. It was actually a really, really cool idea. I'm like, I can get behind this. And I had no idea about valuations of a company or anything like that. It's like, hey, it's $5,000 for 1%. I was like, all right. So I back then I didn't even stop to think, like, all right, that's a 500,000 company. I'm like, all right, what are their sales? Anything like that. In hindsight, I'm like, what was I doing? So sure enough, I send my $5,000 check. I get all the paperwork, this, that, and the other. And 6 months later, the vice president walked off with $80,000 and blew it on strippers and cocaine.
Oh my goodness.
So the funny part about it was I loved the product. I still to this day think it's an outstanding product. And as I understand, there were still like 4,000 units sitting in a warehouse in Michigan somewhere. And I couldn't even get my hand on the product. I own 1% of it. And I literally, and my wife actually has a pair that we got her that she still uses to this day with her training. And she's like afraid to lose it because they don't exist anymore. Oh, what it was for me, it was like, I only loosely knew of it. And after I did that, I said, you know what, the only thing I'm ever going to invest in are myself and things that I know well. Yeah. And that's why I'm like so impressed with like Justin Timberlake. That fascinates me. The guy who was a singer has become a successful dancer, successful actor, director, producer. Yeah. He owns part of the Memphis Grizzlies. Like People who are successful across disciplines like that, to me, are awe-inspiring. It's very, very hard to do. So what I always just tell people is like, the chances of you being successful with a new product in a new market are really low. You either need to take a new product to the same markets because you know that market really, really well, or you need to take an old product to new markets. And, those are, you look at New Balance, they're having a ton of success in Asia right now. Like you can probably find 3 pairs of New Balance for every pair of Nike in like Hong Kong at this point. Wow. Because they've taken, old products and introduced them to new markets. So that's what I try to do. I try to only invest in things I know well. And sure enough, my best investment ever was putting $127,000, every penny I had, into Cressy Sports Performance. Yeah. And I did it in 2007, right before the market tanked. If I had put it in the market, I would have lost half of it. Instead, I had a business that appreciated and did 10% growth every year for the next 8 years. So it was kind of an accidental investment, but looking back, it was one that was really fruitful.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Sticking on kind of that investing in yourselves, and we can return back to more, investment stuff. But one of the things that handling the wealth and hopefully legacy of clients that we talk about is, there's the unicorn of chasing of, I just want you to double my money and do all this crazy stuff, right? And it takes a crazy amount of risk to be able to do those type of returns. So the thing we constantly tell them is literally, there's nothing that's going to make you wealthier than being the best baseball player, right? I mean, the way that these guys make money, and on one of the podcasts that I was listening to you of yours, you had made the comment that there was actually an agent that made the comment to you that, Eric, the thing that I love is I feel like you're working on a player's pension while everybody else is worried about them getting drafted. And I just thought that was like, oh my goodness, that is so true. And just talk about, for the athlete, of looking at themselves as an investment, because I see the offseason. I made this as a player. I hear our clients, complain about, I've got this offseason, the workout, and it just feels like that's, there isn't this investment mentality of understanding the connection of, in a sabermetric world, like what's an extra 10 home runs, what's an extra, innings pitched, and all those things. Talk to me about just your philosophy on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think you can separate what we do from what you do, if that makes sense. Like there are absolutely physiological and biomechanical things that we do that markedly impact the player's earning potential. So I'll give you an example. We had a guy who was in high A that came to us in 2010. He had seen a really well-known orthopedist, and he'd had some elbow issues before he first came in. And they diagnosed him as having some really considerable calcification on his ulnar collateral ligament. So basically what we know about guys who are like that is it means they had like a low grade or potentially high grade partial UCL injury, and that area just calcified over. So their body healed it. And we know those areas of calcification are the ones that in many cases down the road explode, right? So, you have this, and this is what we see when we have a 19-year-old kid who throws 100 miles an hour, who blows out. In many cases, during the surgery, you go and you look at it, and there were previous areas of kind of defect on that ligament. Yeah. So some of those guys are ticking time bombs, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of those guys drafted every year. So what's really, really interesting, though, is, the player had the option of kind of going the conservative route or going with surgery. And I said to him, relatively like good player on an upward trajectory. And my response to him was like, why would you have the surgery right now? If you think about it this way, you're asymptomatic. And we know that, and I don't know how accurate this number is. I remember a strength coach in professional baseball telling me that if you have a surgery in minor league baseball, it cuts your chances of making it to the big leagues in half. So I said to him, like, that's a big deal, but here's the bigger issue. Let's say we do this and it goes great, and you get through the next 3 years and you get to the big leagues and you blow out. You're going to get a year of service time and $550,000 for rehabbing this.
100%.
Yeah. So that was 2010. It's 2018 and his elbow is still intact. So, it's a testament to training, his hard work, and, some luck, and all those things. But, you look at stuff like that, and it absolutely plays into his earning potential. Like, we don't know how it would have been different if he had Tommy John back then or whatever it may be. But, certainly there are situations like that come to light all the time. So,
yeah.
I think we're approached a lot, whether it's character references before the draft or, things along those lines. You have to be cognizant of, we'll get calls at draft time about second opinions on MRIs and stuff like that. So it's all that impacts players' earning potential.
Yeah.
So you have to be a realist about stuff, and you have to at least understand, where the likelihoods fall on a lot of these things.
Yeah. So sticking on that, kind of a two-part question: where are players costing themselves money in the off season when it comes to the way that they're handling or not handling training in general? And then during the season, where are you seeing the biggest mistakes made that that athletes could have the biggest return on their investment?
Yeah, I think, players, the biggest struggle on my end that I've seen over the years is the one that drives me bonkers. And a lot of times it's driven by the teams. It's the season ends and it's, hey, just take a month off, like don't do anything, go hiking or do yoga or something like that. So what it actually creates are a couple different things. The first thing I would say is there are a lot of players, if they do nothing training wise, they will eat horribly, they will drink, they will make bad life decisions in general. For whatever reason, every time they go to the gym, it keeps their life on track.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of guys that just feel gross and sloppy when they first walk in, and it literally, shifts things on a moment's notice. So I think there's that side of things. The second thing is a lot of times guys are banged up at the end of the season. There's something fundamentally wrong with them, whether it's, they've lost 20 degrees of elbow extension, their hips barking at them, they've whatever it may be. And really that first month it's a recharge month, but it's also a great opportunity to get to work on some stuff that may be wrong. And those are the easy gains, like it's single leg balance, working on mobility, getting some massage, optimizing nutrition, getting on a regular sleep schedule, really easy things. So honestly, I push really, really hard to get guys back in within a week and a half or so. Say, hey, the season ends, take your 3 or 4 days to travel and see family, get adjusted, move to wherever you needed to move. And then even if you're not going to get ready to train and get going, I at least want to see you early so that we can identify if something's glaringly wrong.
Yeah.
And I just look at our guys who have been successful over the years, like, the Corey Klubers of, the Tim Collins, and like these guys who have, exceeded expectations. Like they're always the guys that are like back the day that the season ends. Like they're not good at taking time off. Noah was the same way. Like he had his week at the end of the season, he was right back into it. So I always try to push for that. But if you think about that over the course of a 15-year career, like that's a big deal. That's someone who gets an extra 3 off seasons in if they spend that first month getting to work.
Yeah.
That's a big issue. The hardest one, honestly, and there's no way around this, off-season weddings. I have a friend who's in pro ball and he's like, oh, it's wedding season. He's like, basically the second the World Series ends, we have 6 weekends where they can have weddings. One of them is Thanksgiving, which is often off limits. And then there's winter meetings and all that. So there's this kind of mad rush during what should be the heart of the off season. So when you see a guy that gets married, usually that's a week that's a bust. In many cases, there's travel for wedding arrangements beforehand. There's, stuff after the fact. So historically, you'll see guys who have trouble after the off season when they were married, just because they lost, in many cases, like 4 to 6 weeks. You never tell them don't get married, but it's just, it's challenging. What you usually have the conversations of, it's like, hey, if you're going to do this, we're going to train Monday through Thursday. You have Friday through Sunday on your own. Try not to get completely blitzed at this bachelor party.
Yeah.
Try to make good decisions because you're really trying to salvage what's already going to be a short off season.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. I mean, we see that with our guys. You could chart, and this is just the reality of life, right? Like you can chart marriage and kids, and we joke, and it's you have it unique when you're not just wrestling one, you're wrestling two. We've had a few clients have twins, and just the timing of that, and it's a reality, right? Is I think the rest of how we operate our lives is going to affect our performance, you know?
It's opportunity cost, right?
Yeah.
If the opportunity cost to having, in our case, twin daughters, and staying up all night, giving them bottles and stuff is sleep. Not that, think about it. If you're a pitcher and you're holding a baby in your throwing arm for 3 hours a day, we see neck pain all the time in baseball guys when they have babies. It's like carbon, to the point that I coach guys on how to hold babies. It's really an economic cost, concept of opportunity cost. The one that blows me away is tattoos on your throwing arm. I know that there are guys that do it. It's a form of artistic expression. All right, you get a tattoo on your throwing arm. You miss a week of training. You just drop $400 that in many cases you don't have, and you expose yourself to a risk of infection. I was like, there's literally nothing that good that can come from this. Like, this can wait until you're retired. But, there are reasons guys do it. And so they have to weigh the cost and the benefit, just like everything else. But, there are millions of examples like that unfortunately, a lot of times, like a 19-year-old, high school draft pick's not going to think those things through. And that's why I think it's so important to have guys like you and guys, like agents in their world that hold them accountable and challenge them and, want them to kind of serve a higher standard.
Yeah, that's leading right into my thought is, you and I were on a shared call 2 weeks ago surrounding a specific player. And, that just makes me think of how much you genuinely care about the individual, not only just their performance on the field, but you really care about these guys. And, if you're speaking, and this really applies to everybody, not just an athlete, but talk about, surrounding yourself with the right people, maybe even share, what mentors have meant for you throughout your life and having people that one of the things I loved that on your previous podcast was the fact that you said one of you think your differentiators is that you're direct and you're honest and your feedback and I just think that is so key. Talk to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of ways you can go. One of the things I would definitely say is that we've always said we train families. We don't just train players. So I certainly think that, plays into this discussion a little bit, but, in the interest of being direct, I think that's something I'm actually not very good at, but I've worked really, really hard to do it more over the years. But I think it's really heavily predicated on the idea of you have to build that rapport early on. And I think that comes from understanding how to interact with guys, how to ask questions other people haven't asked, how to genuinely listen. And, at the end of the day, our goal with training is to inspire confidence, right? So you think about it this way, you have a friendship with somebody, and you've known them for 15 years and, you've been through them through the up and the downs. Like they're the people that, they confide in you. They tell you things that are important. And certainly for you, there's also a level of like, fiduciary confidentiality that they have that they can fall back on. What's interesting in the strength and conditioning field is athletic trainers, physical therapists, doctors, they're bound by HIPAA regulations. Strength and conditioning coaches aren't. So by technically just by the nature of our business, like they aren't, I'm more likely to share their medical information, if you really think about it. And we don't do that. Obviously we adhere to HIPAA, heavily, but so it just means that to me that we have to work that much harder to gain their trust. We have to really, really show that we care and, and stand on our heads. And I think there's like this old adage in, the strength and conditioning industry that, is probably around in other industries as well. They don't care how much you know unless they know how much you care.
Yeah.
And that goes in a lot of difference. I mean, I've had, big leaguers who have shown up crying because they're in the middle of a divorce, and you spend the first 30 minutes of a training session just listening and, talking things through like that. We've, had situations where, we've had to help guys through pretty crazy stuff. So, I definitely understand the human aspect of it. And I don't think I understood that at age 22, 23, 24, when I was first coming out. Those are the soft skills of coaching that I think a lot of people overlook. And I see that with you and the number of players that we kind of co-manage. Very rarely are there conversations all about money. A lot about family, it's about faith, it's about all those other things that are important to them. But, in one way or another, those things set them up for financial success, training success, baseball success, whatever it may be. So you really have to get to know the person before you can even start to get to know the athlete.
Yeah. No doubt about that. So transitioning a little bit to your own kind of, personal life, running a business, being a family guy, and I think this is what's really going to speak a lot to the other business owners and entrepreneurs of, I want to cover two things. Number one, I just love to hear your approach on staying healthy, So here you are obviously running hard. I mean, Anna, your wife, is a business owner herself. I think that's what most people probably don't know. And then you throw twins on top of that, right? And you guys seem to, I think the illusion of like balance is not real. I don't even think it's the right goal, right? It's priority management, but it seems like you guys are at least, it's at the forefront. And just talk about how you've handled your own health and that tension of supporting, Anna and what she's doing is making that just as valuable as what you're building. And what's that look like to have two entrepreneurs in the home?
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. What I would tell you is my wife is a rock star on many fronts. I'm a very, very lucky guy, and I would say that she supports me far more than I could ever support her. I mean, my wife, for those that don't know, my wife's an unreal optometrist. She has a really, really big level of expertise in cornea and contact lens. So, she worked at a practice here in Boston, Boston Foundation for Sight, which is world renowned for doing a lot of like hard lenses. So like Tommy Pham, right? Keratoconus. Like my wife sees keratoconus every single day. It's like her wheelhouse. So she would have patients come from India, Australia, all over the place to come and basically, see for the first time. So there'd be people walked out of her office crying because they hadn't seen in years. I'm like, all right, I got a guy 10 degrees of elbow extension. I'm not changing the world. And Anna walked away from a lot of that so that we could open in Florida, along with having kids and stuff. So, we split our years between Florida and Massachusetts because our daughters are 3 right now and haven't started school. So we're 7 months in Florida and 5 months here. And so Anna will see patients when we're back here in Massachusetts for 5 months. And then she'll help out at the gym when we're down in Florida. So we kind of joke she's the most overqualified, office manager in the history of the strength and conditioning field. And, to her credit, like she has a ton of humility and loves what she does and she knows all our athletes and busts their chops on the floor. And, we go to games together and she's a huge, baseball fan and a good sport about it. So I'm very fortunate in that regard. And to all the entrepreneurs that would listen and the baseball players too, like, you have to make sure that, they know what they're getting into and they're along for the ride. And I'll never forget, who told me this was Mariana Bichette, Dante's wife. She said, I've been around a lot of baseball players over the years and, they've been married for decades at this point and have, 2 sons that were both first day picks in the draft. And, Bo's absolutely crushing it as a high school draft. He was in AA, I think at 20. She said, all the relationships I've seen, the wives either have to be all in or all out. They have to either have their own thing that keeps them occupied and fulfilled, or they have to be like ready to live the baseball, lifestyle. So you look at Mariana, like she's a fitness fiend, like she learned massage techniques, like she is all about healthy food, and she's done, so much to really help set, Bo and Dante Jr. up for success. And I remember her that conversation distinctly. And I just, as I've thought about it, when we've seen guys who have had, challenges on the home front, in many cases it's because they didn't have that, that option. It was someone that was kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And it's not a criticism of the females because no one has ever really taught them, how, living a life as a major league wife or girlfriend really is. So it's cool to see more and more of like the, like Lori Ankiel does some stuff with Our Baseball Life and, the WAGs in real life. And it's interesting seeing how at least now they have like the support system to kind of help them through that stuff. So I think that's absolutely outstanding. We actually had Nick Wickern's wife, Ashley Crosby, now Wickern, worked for us at our Florida facility. So we actually had a baseball wife on staff. So I got to learn even more about it. And sure enough, Ashley had her strength and conditioning career. She was all about it. And, so she trained a bunch of our pro guys in the off season. So it was very, very cool to see that. But what I would say in the concept of balance, and you're right, it's about priorities. There was a great Sheryl Sandberg interview years ago that, was published as an article on, I don't know if it was Forbes or Entrepreneur or whatever. She said, basically family, work, sleep, fitness, and friends. Pick 3. And if you think about your life, I guarantee you that's what it is. And where we're fortunate, right, is our friends are often the people that we work with. Of course. 95% of my social acquaintances are people at the gym. So for me, it's very much family, it's fitness, and it's work. So what gets pushed out? Friends and sleep, unfortunately. So I'm not a good sleeper. And traditionally when I get sick, it's because I haven't gotten my 5 hours. It's been more like 3 hours. So, and that's where having twins threw me for a loop, and I started drinking way too much caffeine. But, we eat healthy. We're spoiled in that regard because Anna's a really, really good cook, and we make good choices in that regard. But you just can't have it all, and you've got to decide what it is. And obviously, some of those things change as time goes on. You retire and work gets pushed out. So, maybe you sleep a little bit more, or maybe you have more time with friends, whatever it may be. But you're right. It's all about shifting priorities. You can't be everything to everybody.
Yeah, no doubt. Staying, just kind of on that, when you think of being a dad, right? And being a business owner, and I'm such a believer, so much more is caught than taught. That's how we are is, how do you wrestle with that tension of being away from home or being present? And because I think there's a ton of value too that, I think it can go on the flip side to where people try and demonize work and make it a bad thing. And we think it's a good thing, right? It's a gift from God that we should be highlighting it. Just how do you think about, trying to be present with your kids and still crushing it from a business standpoint? Just talk about being a dad.
It's probably the hardest thing in my life. Like that being present thing, when you know that, entrepreneurship is a 24-hour thing. There's always, especially in baseball, right? Guys, their games end, at 10:30 at night, and they want to text or talk or something like that. And that's the other thing I'm sure you deal with it too. It's like, there are a lot of times when, like you have that, 19-year-old kid that doesn't realize, like, when he calls, like, you might have like 2 screaming children, like you literally can't answer the phone and talk because you wouldn't be able to hear him. So, those are the ones that can be really, really challenging. You do your best to kind of meet them where they're at, but it's very, very hard. And it's something I'm consciously working on getting better at is, when you walk home or when you walk in the door at home, like, you throw the phone in the drawer and you just don't answer it until the girls go to bed. You try not to like flip open the laptop, and what I valued more than anything else before, now I value more than I ever did before is, early morning time before the girls get out of bed, like 5:30 to 7 a.m. And I know you're an early morning workout guy. I usually train a little bit later on, but that 90 minutes first thing in the morning with, a cup of coffee and peace and quiet is huge, because if you sleep in, you don't get that. And ultimately your kids are the ones that pay for it. So, I've tried to do more and more, like, making time in my schedule to do the things I need to do, including, obviously spend time with the girls, as opposed to trying to find time, because invariably when you're finding time, you have the laptop at the kitchen counter while you've got a 3-year-old pulling at your leg. She wants you to go do a puzzle with her or something like that. And that's the worst, when you feel like you're doing both things poorly. So my wife is on me all the time about being better about it. And she's 100% right.
Yeah. As far as, just being a business owner and entrepreneur of taking care of yourself, right? I think that something usually goes out the door, like you had mentioned in those 5 things, but, to be a sustainable high performer over a very, very long period of time, I know it's training's stayed very important to you, and people can say, oh yeah, it's easy because it's like, no, it's not. It's just as difficult for you to get in the gym as it is for me or any other business owner. So just if you could give advice to the entrepreneurial world of, hey, if you've only got 30 minutes a day, what are the core things that we should be paying attention to? And maybe what are the hurdles or obstacles that we're going to see as we turn, 35, 40, 45, 50 years old that we really need to pay attention to for quality of life?
Yeah. Owning a gym is kind of like scooping ice cream for a job. Ice cream's awesome for like 2 weeks, and then you get sick of ice cream. So the gym can be challenging in that regard, because in many cases, like, if I work out at our gym after, like, I'm done with my work, but the gym's still open, like, you're chatting with clients, like, idiot that goes and like does a set of deadlifts and then grabs the dust buster and cleans like a little dust bunny I see under a piece of equipment or something. So, that part is really challenging. What's actually I've done that's helped me, that I think anybody would be wise to do, is, if you're an entrepreneur, you should have something at home you can do, right? So getting to the gym is awesome. I have a rowing machine at both houses, and we have a kettlebell in our garage, just like one 32-kilogram kettlebell that you can use for swings, Turkish get-ups, whatever it may be, just something convenient. My wife rowed in college, so it's right in her wheelhouse. So it was a cool birthday present that we both used. But that thing is huge, because you'd be surprised. Like, there are gonna be those days when you don't have the hour and a half to drive to the gym, do your thing, but you can go out and you can thrash, 2,000 meters on a rowing machine, and be the worst, in my case, 7 minutes, 39 seconds of your life. And it's awesome. And that part is huge. So I think sometimes you have to make exercise more convenient, whether it's getting out and sprinting, whatever, maybe it helps to have accountability, right? A training buddy who jumps in on the madness. But, I think the biggest thing you're going to deal with, like, probably your prime audience here, is after 30, mobility it falls off really quickly. And whether that's because we're sitting at desks, sitting on planes, sitting in cars more often, that tissue you have is much less like filet mignon and a lot more like beef jerky. So you have to spend a lot more time on, invest in massage, get on a foam roller, move it around, put some mobility work in at the start of every training session, make sure you're training, through full ranges of motion. That stuff really, really does pay off. That's the biggest thing I've noticed, over the course of the last probably 5 years or so, is that, the amount of mobility work I was doing before to maintain it isn't nearly as enough. I need more frequency and a targeted effort there. So it's hard because you usually have to pull back from somewhere else if you want to devote that extra time for it.
And mobility is one of those things that it's like you never want to do. Even when I was, training as an athlete, it's the prep work, and when you get done with the workout, that's the last thing you want to do.
Exactly. It's like cleaning the gutters. If you don't do it, something bad's going to happen.
Yeah. Is there any, and maybe it's one of the books you've written or something, is there any resource on kind of what the audience could turn to for mobility, of some exercises or?
Yeah, I've got a ton of stuff actually on my YouTube page. It's youtube.com/eCressy. So I've got a bunch of kind of like, I have I think there's one video called like must try mobility drills. There's like 4 of them, which is, stuff that you can do really, really quickly. We have our foam rolling series up online too. So all free stuff they can check out.
Awesome. And I'll show, I'll throw links in the show for that for sure.
Perfect.
Just a few things. I know your time is limited.
Oh, you're all good. Take your time, man.
I super appreciate it. But a few questions that we've just been asking all of our guests, are first, how has a specific failure and apparent failure set you up for later success? I mean, I know our road is littered with failures amongst the success. Yeah. So are there a few that stick out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I was a tennis player in high school. I was a pretty good tennis player and got recruited to play in college. And my shoulder was so bad basically in 2003, and I didn't play in undergrad because of it, and basically got to my wit's end where it was like, waking me up at night, all of that. And so the summer of 2003, finally a doc said, hey, it's time for surgery. You got a pretty nasty cuff tear in there. And, it was interesting. It was kind of like a weight lifted off my back, where it's like, I feel like I've tried everything. I've gone to multiple physical therapists, haven't gotten better, tried activity modifications and all that. And so what happened was, right after he basically gave me that order, we decided, all right, I'm leaving for grad school. I'm going to come back. I'm going to do this surgery in December over my winter break. So I've got, my 4 weeks of mobilization, all this stuff. So I went to grad school totally expecting to have surgery in 4 months. Got to the University of Connecticut, got around some smart people, found a new manual therapist, and just buried my head in books and read as much as I could about shoulder function, and played around my training, did some different rehab stuff on my own. And sure enough, I called him on Halloween Day, I remember, and canceled the surgery. So, a huge setback, and literally like 5 to 6 years of chronic pain in my shoulder.
Wow.
Was a setback that effectively, looking back, kind of set me up for this career I have. Because I figured out, like, hey, that was 2003. It's 2018. I still haven't had that shoulder operated on. At some point, I'm sure I will. But no, I can long toss with our guys. I can do just about everything except for back squat. So it was a miserable 5 years, but it was something that actually put me in a really good position to be the shoulder guy much down the road.
Wow. How about as far as, you've referenced books, you've referenced just your commitment to expertise and to knowledge. Have there been any, mentors in your life that stick out, or, and it could be mentors from afar of certain people that you follow, who comes out, who sticks out to you?
Yeah, certainly. I think it always helps to, hear it from guys who have walked, in the shoes that you're walking in. Like if you're a big league pitcher, right, you're going to relate really, really well to a guy who pitched in the big leagues. You look at guys like Rick Ankiel or Bob Tewksbury, who are really able to relate to players well because they lived at that level. For me, my mentors have been in the fitness industry. A guy like Alan Cosgrove was super impactful for me in terms of teaching us how to kind of incorporate the semi-private model. Pat Rigsby is a close friend I can, kind of call anytime and, kind of bounce ideas off of. And he's a really good listener and doesn't try to pigeonhole you into one specific model. He kind of meets you where your business is at, helps talk you through things. So there are a lot of guys like that. And I'm fortunate to have a really good business partner, Pete Dupuis, who's been with me since day one in Massachusetts, and then Shane Brian Kaplan are my business partners in Florida. So I have people like that who, serve as mentors every day, because, it's always good to have, somebody that you feel like is always rowing in the same direction as you, where you can, you can bounce ideas off. And in Massachusetts, we joke, I'm kind of like the ideas guy. I'm the gas pedal. Pete kind of pumps the brakes and, brings us back to reality and, helps with implementation and stuff. So I think you always have to have those people. But yeah, I've been spoiled, and I've had great mentors on, the actual training side of things. Chris West at UConn, Tina Murray, who was at UConn, who's now at Louisville, were great to me. A guy named Daryl Conan in my hometown. So I've been spoiled to be around some really, really good people.
Yeah, that's great. If you were given advice to a smart, driven athlete who's transitioning off the field into kind of the second career, whether this is, maybe a college kid that plays D1, doesn't get a chance, or it's also a major leaguer who has, essentially financial success. Money's no longer an option, and his career's over at 38 years old, and he's sitting there going, I have no idea what I want to do. What advice would you give them of when they say, I don't know what I want to do, but I think I want to be an investor, or I want to get into the business world?
What I would say is the idea of follow your passion is garbage. I posted this quote. There was a great quote from a book called The Four, The Hidden DNA of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. It says, people who tell you to follow your passion are already rich. Don't follow your passion, follow your talent. Determine what you're good at early and commit to becoming great at it. You don't have to love it, just don't hate it. If practice takes you from good to great, the recognition and compensation you will command will make you start to love it. And ultimately, you will be able to shape your career and your specialty to focus on the aspects you enjoy the most.
Wow.
You don't want to follow your passion. You want to build substantial career capital, right? And that's what it really takes. And as I look back on the success we've had in the career, I wasn't necessarily inherently passionate about shoulder. I just had a bad shoulder, and I learned a lot about it to get me out of pain. What I realized was that marketable skill was very applicable in the baseball community. And the more and more I got around it, I'm like, man, this is fun. I'm good at this. I like watching baseball. When I was a kid, I taught myself to read with baseball cards. So it made sense. And, that's what happens. Like the whole idea of follow your passion, and there are, the annals of entrepreneurship failure are loaded with people who followed their passion, had horrible ideas that just didn't work out.
Yeah.
I can be passionate about basketball. It doesn't mean I'm going to play in the NBA. So I think we have to really, really separate ourselves from our marketable skills and our passion.
Yeah. And so for an athlete, what's that look like when I've had a skill set that's only been on the field, right? What does that mean? And what I think I'm trying to lead the witness into is talk about the work ethic and the humility that it's going to take to, get into the next level.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. If you look at how we hired our facility as a frame of reference, we hire based on competency and based on fit. And for us, if you look at our Massachusetts facility, I have a math major on staff. I have a criminal justice major. One of our best coaches ever had one semester of college. My business partner, Brian, in Florida, had 1 year at Notre Dame. He was a stud pitcher who went to play there and he had thoracic outlet before it was cool to have thoracic outlet. He's one of the best baseball strength and conditioning guys on the planet. He gets through to players like you wouldn't believe. He's absolutely phenomenal. So I think a lot of times it's those experiences you've had, the way that they've shaped you, your ability to kind of get through to people. A lot of times the players that have failed are the ones that wind up being the best coaches. Would you rather learn a curveball from a guy who it came to really easy, or would you rather learn a curveball from a guy who had to struggle for years with 5 different grips and different mechanics to throw it? Those are the guys you want. So I hire based on fit above all else, because I know I can teach people to be competent in our system, but it definitely helps for them to build on what they have. You have hard work, you have a knowledge of the game. It makes sense to leverage your abilities in baseball and your idea of the work ethic it takes to be successful, in a second career.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Two questions left. What's the best or most worthwhile investment that you've personally made? And it could be time, it could be money, it could be effort.
Yeah. You know what I'll say is it was the investment in my business.
Yeah.
You know, looking back on it, you know, I mentioned kind of the dollars and cents of it, but it was a chance to, you know, take money and invest in something that I understood and I believed in. And, you know, I knew my work ethic. So in hindsight, it was very accidental that it was timed that way. But you know, it was definitely a good move.
Yeah. And so the last one, which is my favorite, is I think there's the quote that it's not that what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you think you know that just saying isn't true is what gets you into trouble. So what are some of the bad recommendations that you're consistently hearing in the industry that athletes should absolutely run the other way from?
Ooh. I mean, you can probably speak this. Never loan money to your uncle who has a crazy real estate idea. It's kind of a common one. I mean, there's those over the years. You know, I think the challenges also is I think there are a lot of players that just don't realize, you know, how exposed they are, you know, to if you make a bad decision, like you're held to a higher standard and stuff. So particularly with respect to social media, you'll hear, you know, good people who, you know, say the wrong thing on social media and it comes back to bite them in the butt really, really quickly. So I think there's more accessibility to high level athletes than there ever has been before. And I think, you know, what's really interesting is it's a little bit generational. Like if you look at like, you know, like we have Max Scherzer with Corey Kluber, you know, Lance Lynn, some of those guys who have been around the game, you know, considerably longer, like they're kind of over social media. Even like Logan Morrison, like Logan was one of the most like present guys on Twitter back in the day. And I mean, if you go on, he's playing for the Minnesota Twins right now as a DH, and he's still listed as a Seattle Mariners outfielder from 2014 on Twitter handle. Like, I don't think he remembers his login. So I think you're seeing more and more mature players who are recognizing that, you know, it leaves them exposed and it's a distraction. So they just kind of like tune out social media. Whereas there's a whole other generation of guys that love it. They're all over it. They're glued to their iPhones and, you know, they're constantly updating across multiple platforms. So that's an interesting kind of like, you know, fork in the road that different guys have taken in different directions. But I think, you know, some of those younger guys do need to be really cognizant of how exposed they are, because it's different than it was in years past.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, it's not bad advice. I think it's the advice, right? If they're trying to build their platform and I think it's true that, yeah, you've got Gary Vee out here saying this stuff but as a professional athlete, you're also in this unique thing that your best investment to create generational wealth, right,
Absolutely.
is to be the best baseball player, you know, and then the platform stuff, it's nothing less than that, but man, that should never become a distraction to you. You know, it's
that's the scary thing about it is, you know, if you chase two rabbits, both get away. And you definitely have seen scenarios where guys spread themselves thin with stuff like that. And, you know, you make your money on the field. That's the absolute truth.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, great. Well, I really appreciate, obviously, the time that you gave here. Lastly, is there anything that you'd ask of our audience? I mean, I know you're constantly putting out content that I consume and attempt to implement, but what are you working on now that's most exciting that we should know about?
I'm just gearing up for another crazy summer of training college guys here in Massachusetts. But no, if anybody has questions, I am on social media. So it's just cool. Eric Cressy on both Twitter and Instagram. Don't be shy about reaching out. I'm always happy to help out with questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Athlete CEO podcast. I hope you enjoyed our show today and are ready to take action on the advice from today's episode. Our goal with the Athlete CEO podcast is to make it the go-to resource for athletes and entrepreneurs looking to take their game to the next level. Love the show? You have any suggestions on how we can improve? We'd love to hear from you. Send us an email, tweet, and share your thoughts. We do our best to read every single one. We'll see you next week with another world-class episode.